Becoming a digital nomad during a pandemic. Yay or nay? Becoming a digital nomad during a pandemic was not one of my greatest ideas. To be fair, it wasn't something I planned to do at all. It morphed out of the sheer necessity to survive. In late 2019, I headed to Canada from Costa Rica, where I had been working as an English teacher. At the time, I planned to stay in the Great White North only as long as needed to get a visa to return to the United States, where I was living the year before. I filled my days teaching English online, writing a book, and dealing with visa requirements. The longer I stayed, the more I realized how truly amazing Canada was, and began envisioning a life there. My head filled with the possibilities of getting a good job, accompanied by a working visa, finding a cozy little apartment where I could start rebuilding my life and making a circle of great friends. As autumn set in and the leaves began to turn and fall, I gazed in wonder at the multitude of colors as school buses bursting with students trundled past me on my daily walks. Winter set in, and so did the snow. After 43 years of living in the Southern Hemisphere, the white wonderland that greeted me on many mornings filled me with glee and joy. As Christmas neared, visions of sugar plums danced in my head. Candy cane reindeer lit up on people's front lawns, and strings of lights glowed in the night as they adorned eaves and roofs. It was every Christmas movie come to life, and I revelled in it all. As we entered 2020, a global pandemic started to rage, and I found myself in a unique set of circumstances. I had been unable to secure a job, and the 180 days allowed on my visitor's visa were counting down rapidly. People all over the world were asked to shelter in place, and countries were extending visas without question, not wanting travelers to spread the unprecedented virus. I extended my visa until the end of the year and continued teaching English as a second language online. A classic digital nomad job, until I could figure out what was next. I had made a few new friends just before the social restrictions were put into place, and was able to keep seeing them, albeit 6 feet apart. Nearing the end of the year, my visa extension expiry loomed ever closer, and I found myself at a crossroads. Do I extend it again, or take the opportunity to return to South Africa to visit my parents, who I hadn't seen in 4 years? I decided to return to my country of birth, so I boxed up all of my belongings and left them in a friend's basement. I jumped through all of the COVID restriction hoops, bought a ticket on one of only 2 airlines allowed to travel into the African country, and headed off to Cape Town International Airport for what I anticipated would be a 3-month visit to my parents. Alas, this was not to be. The pandemic dragged on, and Canada's borders remained firmly shut to tourists. 3 months turned into 7. And I found myself going stir-crazy without my social circle and my own space. My parents were both over the age of 70, and I was worried about bringing the virus into their home. So taking off to other cities to catch up with friends was not possible. I became more and more lonely, and slowly drifted into a depressive state, longing for the connections I had built in North America. The South African government was taking their sweet time in getting the population vaccinated, and I was eager to get the shots that would allow me to return to the only place I felt at home, Ontario, Canada. After much online surfing, I decided that Mexico was my best interim option before heading back to the Great White North. I had entertained thoughts of hanging out in Turkey with friends for a few months, but that door slammed shut as they closed their borders to anyone traveling from South Africa, as did the rest of the world. Mexico, however, remained open to anyone with a passport due to the country's heavy reliance on tourism, so I booked a one-way ticket and a month of accommodation in Cancun. I had also planned on getting the much-needed vaccine in the tourist town, but that too felt elusive as I struggled to find the information I needed, as my Spanish was fairly basic. I headed down to Playa del Carmen, where I managed to get both the first vaccine and COVID-19 within days of each other. My 3 months in the coastal town were eventful. I released my first book online, rescued a street cat, made some new friends, and got my second vaccine. With Canada's borders now open to vaccinated travelers, I was on a plane back to Toronto within 2 weeks of the second vaccination. Touching down, I was euphoric at finally reaching my forever destination after 11 months of a nomadic lifestyle. Unfortunately, upon returning to my beloved Canada, I found myself even more isolated than I'd been anywhere else. My closest friends had returned to the US, unable to find a support network or the freedom to explore the country due to the ongoing restrictions. The Omicron variant was ripping through the world, and my Canadian friends were deeply concerned about protecting themselves and their families, therefore not willing to hang out. The past year had been an incredibly challenging time, and whilst I do love my own company, I desperately needed the support of my small friendship group. The unbearable isolation ripped through me with a vengeance I had never experienced before. My Canadian dream was slipping away as companies froze any hiring practices. Despite the obstacles, I couldn't let go. It cost me a small fortune to travel during the pandemic. Between health insurance, translation of vaccine certificates, COVID tests, and additional costs the travel industry levied trying to recoup their losses due to the pandemic. My adventures were filled with more online forms than I had ever completed before, and virus tests that needed to align with departure and arrival times. Becoming a digital nomad during a pandemic was not ideal, to say the least. While restrictions lessened, they were still a factor as I traveled through Turkey, the Netherlands, and Germany in 2022. By the time my nomadic journey continued in early 2023 as I headed back to Mexico, and then again later in the year to Brazil, restrictions no longer came into play. I now long to settle, to grow some roots and give myself the stability that my weary body and mind so desperately need. 2021 almost broke me, and while the difficulty of the year forced me to open my mind and chase a future I had never once dreamed of, it also took a piece of me that I wonder whether I will ever get back. As a nomad, the visa clock starts ticking whenever I land in a new country. And while travelers half my age might find it exhilarating, at 51, I think I've had my fill. This digital nomad would like to lay her passports down and rejoin society, a place to call my own, a good circle of friends, and a couple of kitties to warm my heart is all I crave these days.